Hello and welcome to another video as part of my Why Study Eschatology series, and we're at part 6. This is going to be a longer video just because of the topic that I want to talk about and the amount of time that it spans and just how it kind of connects with a bunch of different things. And so I hope it's not too confusing because I do kind of branch into different topics, but I don't want to get too in depth in them. And I hope to cover them maybe a little bit more in future videos. But I think this is an important topic just so that we can get the kind of the right frame of mind, or just kind of see if maybe the common understandings of things currently in our, whether it be on YouTube or just teaching on these topics, whether it's correct or if we need that kind of paradigm shift or that kind of adjusting to see things from a little bit different perspective. So I hope, again, that this is a blessing for you, and that, it makes sense once we go through it. But again, just, it's going to be a little bit longer video, so I hope that, it's still a blessing, and that it's not too confusing. Again, I want to remind, as we go through all of this and as we dissect it, scripture, and try and let it say what it's trying to say, and so that we can see certain things, that we were reminded of the hope for all of us, that in the end, after all of these things, as terrible as they might be and all the things that might happen, regardless of what I say is going to happen, or what I believe is going to happen, we need to remember that this all leads to Revelation 21, that this is the answer to the question why. Why does God allow these things to happen? Why are these things the part of the perfect plan of God? And it's because in Revelation 21 verse 3, Lord says, or John writes, "And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men and mankind, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. God himself will be with them and be their God. God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away." And then to also remember the promise of the Lord, that as we see the world rejecting God and being seemingly blinded to the gospel, that we remember his promise in Revelation 7, verses 9 to 14. "After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, people, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands." Skip down to verse 13. "Then one of the elders answered, saying to me, Who are these arrayed in white robes, and where did they come from? And I said to him, Sir, you know. So he said to me, These are the ones who come out of the great tribulation, and washed their robes, and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." So the Lord promises that even in the darkest period of human history, the great tribulation, he still saves people. He will not abandon humanity. He will not abandon our loved ones and our friends and our family and all the people on the earth. He will not abandon them. And so I think it's important for us to remember these promises as we cover this topic, because in the end, he is going to work it all out for his glory and for setting up, and making all things new again, and setting up his kingdom. And so that we can have peace in our hearts, we can have joy in our hearts, to say that even while things are happening around us, as terrible as they might be, we can remember and be like, in the end, God is going to work all this out, and that there is a plan to all of this. And that's what that kind of leads me into the next topic as we get into this, is about, faith, right? That we can read these things, we can know that they are true. And it's kind of like Noah's faith. In Hebrews 11:1, it says, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for." We hope for the perfect world that God talks about, but it's evidence of things not seen. Well, what is the evidence of these things that haven't happened yet. It's the fact that the Lord has told us all these things that have happened in the past, that are happening in the present, that will happen in the future, that will lead us to the eternity that we hope for. And when I think about faith, I think about Noah, and that hearing from God must have been great. Like, you imagine if God had a plan for your life and he just came to you and he spoke to you so that you could hear it, and because that's what the Lord did with Noah. He spoke, he said, "What this was what I want." It was clear, and Noah was like, "Okay, well, I'm going to go do it." We see this in Genesis 6, verse 13. And God said to Noah, "The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and outside with pitch. And this is how you should make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits." And he goes on and gives the description of how Noah should build the ark. So Noah had faith in what God said. God told him this was going to happen. He's going to destroy the earth. This is how you prepare. So Noah built the ark. Seems simple enough. And sure, many people made fun of Noah and his family, and I'm sure Noah thought, well, one day they'll believe. One day when the ark is finished, some will believe. When the animals come and the ark is full, I'm sure he thought, then people will believe. But none came. When the ark was full for 7 days and no rain came, I'm sure Noah and his family were sitting there. And I'm sure there were conversations probably about, well, did God really say? Like, did we get something wrong here? Did we misunderstand? And I know that happens many times in our life. And I know that this topic specifically, how many times over the years have Christians been saying that Jesus is going to return? How and things are going to get worse, or things are going to get better depending on your perspective, and they haven't. Um, and so I think that we're in the time frame where it seems like we're close to the Lord's return, but we're not there yet, and he hasn't come yet. But will we have faith to trust in his word and as with what it actually says, and just have faith to live our lives, trusting in him about what he says? And when the rain came down, how many then believed and repented as the waters rose? I think faith is not only trusting what God says, but trusting that he knows from the end from the beginning, that he is the beginning and the end, that he is good, that he is loving, he is merciful and just, and that all his plans, even though we don't understand it, are good, loving, merciful, and just. And I know sometimes there's some Christians who focus more on the loving aspects of God, and the others who focus more on the just aspects of God. But I think that in so many ways and in so many times, God just sees things differently than we do. That where we think he should be just, he is merciful. Where we think he is merciful, he is just. Where we think that he should be this way or that way, and he might be something different in that instance. And I think that that's why sometimes I think it's hard for us as we live as Christians, because God doesn't think like we do. He doesn't see things the same way we do. And our job, part of our growing in a relationship with him, is to figure out how God sees things, how he sees history, how he sees things unfolding, and it's not about what we believe or what we think is right. So so going back, if we Revelation is virtually in chronological order, then we need to understand where the 7 years begins, and we need to understand who this character of the beast is and the character of the Antichrist. Again, I believe that Revelation chapter 1 to chapter 11 are in chronological order, and in Revelation 11:3 it says that the Lord will give power to his two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days. 1,260 days is exactly 3.5 years, using Daniel 9's 360-day calendar. And then in verse 5 and 6 of Revelation 11, it talks about that these two witnesses are invincible. It says, and if anyone wants to harm them, fire will proceed from their mouth and devour their enemies. And if anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this manner. These have the power to shut heaven so that no rain falls in the days of their prophecy, and they have power over waters to turn them to blood, strike the earth with all plagues as often as they desire. So you've got these two witnesses who can do extraordinary things, but also are invincible. No one can kill them. And so when we look at the idea of the 7 years, I don't believe that the 7 years begin at seal 1 in Revelation 6. I believe that the 7 years begins in Revelation 11. So if we look at this on a timeline, we see that we're in the present in 2023. I believe that, again, from Revelation 1 to Revelation 11, if it's in chronological order, means that everything happens before the 7 years. And then we're in Revelation 11:3, the two witnesses preach for 3.5 years. In Revelation 11, verses 1 and 2, the temple is rebuilt. So I believe that is the start of the 7 years. Then the rapture or any of these judgments don't begin the 7 years. It's with the covenant with many, that the Antichrist, the man, has a covenant with many between Israel and the nations for 1 week, and it's supposed to be a covenant of peace for 1 week or 7 years. Well, if seals 2 and seal 4 are about war, then it doesn't make sense if seal 1 is the covenant that begins the 7 years, because then you'd have the covenant signed in seal 1. Then when seal 2 breaks and war breaks out, then there goes that peace agreement, and so there's just some logical flaws that I find challenging with labeling that the 7 years begins in Revelation 6. So then we have these other things that happen. The little horn, the Antichrist, will stand in the temple and declare that he is God at the halfway point through the 7 years, which is 3.5 years. The mark of the beast is issued at the 3.5 year mark in Revelation 13. And then for the final 3.5 years, that's the Great Tribulation. And then you have Jesus returns. So looking into this topic about the Antichrist and the 7 years, because it spans such a large amount of time, I just wanted to give this little timeline to show that we're in 2023, and at some point seal 1 will be broken, and I'll show how I believe that connects to the revealing of the Antichrist. It doesn't mean that the 7 years begins. It doesn't mean that anything happens at that point. It's simply that there's the revealing of the Antichrist. Then at some point, the covenant with many that the Antichrist, the man, will facilitate between Israel and the nations will start the 7 year countdown to Jesus' return. Then at the halfway point in the 7 years, at 3.5 year point, the Antichrist, the man, suffers a head wound, a fatal head wound, and survives. And I believe that he then becomes embodied or empowered by Satan to become the Antichrist, the beast. He's no longer the man. He's something demonic, something satanic that happens to him that changes him from the previous 3.5 years. And then at the end of the 7 years, Jesus returns. And so here we're going to look at the when does the 7 years begin? So Revelation 11:3 says the two witnesses, preach for 1260 days. But then, and then in verses 5 and 6, we see that they're invincible, so nobody can kill them. So they're going to finish their preaching of 1260 days. Then we see in verse 7 of Revelation 11, when the two witnesses finish their testimony after 1260 days or 3.5 years, the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit will make war against them, overcome them, and kill them. So these two invincible witnesses that nobody's been able to kill, all of a sudden this beast figure rises out of the bottomless pit, makes war with them, and kills them. So if we remember from Daniel 9:27, it says, "Then he, the future prince of the people, shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, 7 years, that final 70th week. But in the middle of the week, 3.5 years in, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wind of abominations shall be made one who makes desolate." And then if we look at Matthew 24, verse 15, we see that Jesus references Daniel and the temple and the abomination that happens to the temple. So he references this verse in Daniel 9:27. So again, if we just look at the 1 week being 1200 or 2520 days, right, based on a 360-day calendar, if you divide that into 2 parts, you'd have 2 parts of 1260 days. So when the two witnesses preach for exactly 1260 days, that's 3.5 years, then the beast rises and kills them. So, and then we have, and then after that, in Revelation 11, verse 7, we have the 7th trumpet blown in Revelation chapter 11, verse 15. So I believe, again, that everything that happens up until Revelation 11, verse 15, is all in chronological order. Then what we see in Revelation 12 is that a war breaks out in heaven, and Michael and his angels fought with the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was there a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil, Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. And so we see then this, or in Revelation 13:1, that John sees this beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his head a blasphemous name. So when we read Revelation 11:7, and we see the beast rising, then we see in Revelation 13:1 that the beast is rising here. If we compare it to Revelation 17, verses 7 and 8, we can see the comparison of the two, that this beast that rises in Revelation 13:1 is the same beast that is written about in Revelation 11, chapter 7, that makes war with the two witnesses and kills them. So it says here, "But the angel said to me, Why did you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman of the beast that carries her, which has 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition." So it's just making the comparison that the same beast that has these 7 heads and 10 horns that appear in Revelation 13:1 is the same beast that rises out of the bottomless pit in Revelation chapter 11, verse 7, and kills the two witnesses. So Revelation 11:7 gives us a chronological order. You have the two witnesses preach for 3.5 years. Then this beast rises, makes war with them, and kills them. And this beast is the one that rises here in Revelation 13, and is given authority by the beast. And so here we have Revelation 13, verses 4-7. So they, the world, worships the dragon, Satan, who gave authority to the beast, and they worship the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" And he was given a mouth speaking great things of blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Well, 42 months is 3.5 years. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints to overcome them, and authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. So again, we have the two witnesses preaching for 3.5 years. They're invincible. Nobody can kill them. But then this beast rises, makes war with them, and kills them. And he has authority by Satan over the earth for 3.5 years, or 42 months. And when you add the time frame together, that's 7 years. So I believe the 7 years begins in Revelation 11. But is it a 7-year tribulation? So in modern term, you're going to hear, as you watch YouTube videos and stuff, you're going to hear the term 7-year tribulation. So first, now we know when the 7 years begins, but I don't believe it's 7 years of tribulation, and I'll show you why. So again, we're in the present, 2023. At some point, seal 1, seal 2, seal 3, seal 4, seal 5, and seal 6, and seal 7 will be broken. Then trumpets 1 through 6 will be broken. Then in Revelation 11, you have the beginning of the 7 years after this time of turmoil and war and destruction. You have this Antichrist, this man who makes a covenant with many for 7 years with the nations and between Israel and the nations. And then you have the temple rebuilt, and you have the two witnesses preaching for 1260 days who are invincible. The beast rises then at the halfway mark, at the 3.5-year mark, kills the two witnesses, and is given authority by Satan to rule over the nations for 42 months, or the final 3.5 years, and Jesus returns. And in Matthew 24, verse 21, Jesus talks about that after the abomination of the temple at the 3.5-year mark of the 7 years, that then begins the woe to the earth, begins the time of great tribulation, such as never been seen on the earth before. So I believe that there's a 7-year period that precedes Jesus' return, and the last 3.5 years of the 7 years are the great tribulation, because you have Satan, who has been, and his angels, cast down to earth. He's wrathful, and he tries to destroy Israel, and he's empowered this beast to, now again, whether Satan has embodied him directly and possessed him, and then the beast becomes Satan incarnate, or is definitely a tool, but there is this evil on the earth that that is unleashed in that last 3.5 years. But what does the first 3.5 years look like? So the prince of the people, the Antichrist, the one that is the false Messiah, chosen to be the Messiah of the Jews that they've been waiting forever, he puts this covenant in with many in place for 1 week or 7 years, but his reign is he brings peace to the earth for 3.5 years, but that peace is at a cost. It costs people freedom. It's basically religious authoritarianism, and I'll get into this. But then at the halfway point, then you see the beast embodied by Satan unleashes his wrath, and that's why it's called the Great Tribulation. But I do not believe that the first 3.5 years are tribulation, and I'll get into why. I think a lot of Christians make the same mistake that the Antichrist is the beast all the way through. So when they think about, the Antichrist is going to be some evil dictator, this evil, and yes, he will be that at some point, but he doesn't start out like that. I kind of, compare it to if you're a Star Wars fan, the idea of Anakin Skywalker being the Antichrist, the man, and becoming like the beast, which is like Darth Vader. Like it's the same person, but there's a transition that happens. And there's a deeper story. There's a character arc to this. And I think it's important to understand that. So that you have in the beginning the Antichrist, which is a man. Then you have the beast later on, is the same man, the Antichrist, but he's embodied or fully empowered by Satan when he rises, just like, it used to be, where there was, I think it's Nimrod who was uh, either satanically inspired or possessed. And so when we look at the term Antichrist, it's a Greek word. The prefix anti means in opposition to, in place of, or instead of, and Christ means anointed one. In Hebrew, Messiah means anointed one. So it's the same meaning, but it's a different word depending on the language. So what we're talking about here is a false anointed one. We see Christ and Messiah as interchangeable when we read Matthew 24:5, for example. So the New King James Version says, "For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many." So basically saying, I am the anointed one, and will deceive many. If we read the New Living Translation, it says, "For many will come in my name, claiming I am the Messiah." Again, Hebrew, as opposed to the Greek word Christ, but it still means I am the anointed one, and they will deceive many. So it's the same verse, just whether it has a Greek root or the Hebrew root. And John 5:43, Jesus says, "I've come in my Father's name, and you do not receive me. If another comes in his own name, him you will receive." And so this, I believe, is foreshadowing to this person called the Antichrist. So the Antichrist is basically, if that's a Greek word, is a false Messiah, a false anointed one, who is accepted as the true Messiah in place of Jesus by the Jewish people, is what I understand this whole term to be. Whoever the Jewish people accept as the Messiah, which won't be Jesus, will be the one the Bible calls the Antichrist. Now you have to remember, when we talked about Daniel 9:24, the Lord is purposely, and Romans 11, verses 25 and 26, we see that God has a plan. He's blinded the Jewish people for a time, so that the time of the Gentiles, the time of the non-Jews, can come to know him, come to be saved. When the Lord turns his eyes back to the Jewish people, as Romans 11:27 talks about, at the end of the Gentiles, then they will eventually come to know that Jesus is the Messiah. But they've got to see the false Messiah. They've got to see the one who they claim is the Messiah, who he will turn out to not be the Messiah. In fact, he's not even going to turn out to be not the Messiah. He's going to be turned out to be the worst being, worst person that the Jewish people have ever faced, the worst enemy that they've ever faced. And so it's not like they get it a little bit wrong, like, oh, we just picked another random person. No, the person that they actually declare in the end will be totally corrupted, totally satanic, and will want to destroy them and wipe them out. And so then from that, seeing that this isn't their Messiah, they will eventually come to the knowledge that Jesus was their Messiah, is their Messiah, and be saved through the gospel. So they will accept this false Messiah. He's the Antichrist, not because he's evil from the beginning. I don't think that he knows he's not the Messiah, but I think that he's going to be well versed in Scripture. I think that he's going to be, he's going to, I think could have a backstory of being a good, whether maybe it's a rabbi, maybe it's something, but a good person for Israel, because he does help, is seen as helping them defeat their enemies and all this kind of stuff. But it's not, he's not going to lead them in salvation through Jesus. Eventually, and I'll show you, he's going to lead them and offer salvation through the Mosaic law. And so I think that in North America, Christians can't really see, just they have the wrong image of who the Antichrist is. A lot of names like Trump, Obama, or Bill Gates, or whoever, a whole bunch of names come out. And then you have comparisons. And again, this is where I think the comparison to the beast comes in, where they're like, oh, Nero was an Antichrist, or Hitler was an Antichrist. Not the Antichrist, but and Antichrist, like First John talks about. And so I think that we have this image of evil, of pure evil in our minds. And yes, in the last 3.5 years, the beast will be pure evil, and against the Jewish people and against Christians. But I think in the beginning, when it's the Antichrist, the man, it's more of a religious authoritarianism rather than pure evil, in the sense of demonic, satanically empowered and inspired. And so, when the Antichrist is anointed as the Messiah by the Jews, I think that's the great deception that the Bible talks about. Because for 3,000 years, the Jewish people have waited for the Messiah to come. And when Jesus came, they rejected him. Both Jews and Gentiles set out to crucify him. And the Lord willingly gave his life to save us all. And the reason that the Jews rejected Jesus is because he didn't fit their image. Right? They had an image of this is what the Messiah is going to do. This is what he's going to look like. This is how we're going to worship him and all this kind of stuff. And Jesus says that one day there will be a man who will fit their image, that they will receive and declare him to be their long-awaited Messiah. And that false Messiah, aka the Antichrist, will be anointed by the Jewish people. And that's part of how we'll know that if we're here, that the Antichrist is. This man, like I said, I don't believe will be as evil as we picture it. He's the Antichrist because the Jews declare him to be Messiah, which he is not. He's going to be a man who knows the law and knows the religious rituals of Judaism, and he'll offer salvation via following the Mosaic law. And that's why I believe that the one world false religion is Judaism, because it's not going to point to Jesus for salvation. It's going to point to the law. That's how it comes about. Now, when this all begins to happen, and we have to watch in Israel, because there might be a bunch of rabbis who bring forth candidates, because they believe just that the Messiah will be a learned person. He's going to do some things, but he's not God incarnate. That he's not divine. He's just a person. And so I think that there might be a pool of candidates where different maybe factions say, okay, well, this is my messianic candidate, and so that it might start out with a pool of people, or it just might be where they follow one right off the bat. I don't know. We're going to have to see how that plays out. But because in Matthew 24, verse 26, it talks about that he does signs and wonders and might even deceive the elect, and so, which is the Jewish people. And so I believe that the covenant with many for 7 years will reveal who the real Antichrist is. That there might start to be a pool of candidates, but then when this covenant with many is facilitated by the Antichrist between Israel and the Jewish people and the rest of the nations for peace, then I believe that that's going to be the revealing of who the Antichrist is. I just think that a lot of the imagery that we see is just simply wrong. It's even if let's say you think Trump is the Antichrist, and maybe he is. If the Jewish people declared him to be their Messiah that they've been waiting for these 3,000 years or 2,500 years, whatever it's been, like for that amount of time, and they declare him and they receive him as the Messiah, well then, yes, Trump would be the Antichrist. But it comes down to who they declare, who they believe, who they put their faith in as their Messiah. That makes this person the Antichrist, not because of something, political or something else that this person has done. They're looking for a leader, a military commander who will defeat their enemies, who will usher a time of peace at the pinnacle state of Israel, where I believe Israel will be a huge superpower, and he'll usher in the Messianic age. In Seal 1, Revelation 6:2, we see a rider coming on a white horse. He has a bow with no arrow. He has a crown that was given to him, and he goes out conquering and to conquer. But if we compare this passage to Revelation 19, verse 11, it says about Jesus' second coming, Now I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse. So both riders are on white horses. But it says about Jesus, and he who sat on him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war. On his head he has many crowns, not just one, like the rider in seal 1. And out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, not a bow, that with it he will strike the nations, and he himself will rule them, not conquer them, with a rod of iron. So the Revelation 6 rider, there's different similarities but differences, and I believe that the Revelation 6 rider mimics Jesus. He's an imposter. He's a counterfeit. He's not the true Messiah, but I believe that's where the revealing of the Messiah, of this false Messiah by the Jewish people, takes place. And we can already see, that we're in the time where some of the rabbis are starting to change. They're starting to become more specific about when they think Messiah is going to come. So this particular rabbi writes in Israel 365 article, and I'll show it to you later, but he talks about two revealings. So he says that he believes in Yom Kippur 2021, that the Messiah will reveal himself and then disappear. Then in 2022, in Yom Kippur, a year later, that the Messiah will reemerge. So there'll be a second appearing, and on that second appearing, he will be received out of the desert, just like Moses and the Torah came down from Sinai and were received in the desert, that they will receive the Messiah from the desert. But this time the desert will not be what you think it is. It'll be something completely different. And so what that means, I don't specifically know, but what I'm saying is that you can see that in their thinking that they have that this Messiah is going to appear twice. There's going to be a break where he disappears, or goes kind of underground, goes into the wilderness, goes into the desert. And I think that when we look at this, so the seal 1, I think, is when the false Messiah reveals himself. Then he kind of fades into the background. Maybe he's working with countries, setting up conversations, or maybe he is on some spiritual journey into the wilderness. I don't know. But then he reemerges and is received from the desert, facilitates this covenant with many for 7 years, and then the Jewish people believe that brings in the false, like the Messianic age, but it's a false Messianic age. And we look at Matthew chapter 4, verse 8, when Jesus was tempted in the wilderness, and it says, again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. All this I will give to you, Satan said, if you will bow down and worship me. And Jesus said to him, away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. And so I wonder if during this period of time of disappearance into the desert, into the wilderness, if that is where Satan will come to him, this false Messiah, and offer him the kingdoms of the world and all their splendor. And if that false Messiah says yes, he'll follow Satan, because in Revelation 13:4 it says that they worship the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worship the beast. And then verse 7b, 17, the authority was given to him over every tribe and nation. All who dwell on the earth will worship him. So it's this beast receives authority from Satan. And Jesus in Matthew 4 never disputes Satan's claim that he has the ability to hand over the authority of the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. And so I think that was a true temptation. Jesus knows that Satan has that ability, that he has the authority over the kingdoms of the world. He is the God of the age. And so that he would have the ability that if Jesus bowed down and worshipped him, he would get all the kingdoms of the world. But again, that wasn't the plan, and Jesus never gave in to that temptation. But I wonder if the false Messiah will, and then later on have the ability to be, to have the kingdoms of the earth. One of the things that when we're talking about the Antichrist and kind of how he comes on the stage and how all these things are going to kind of unfold, I think I have a different view than many Christians and Bible prophecy teachers. So I'll just explain what I understand and we'll just kind of leave it at that. So I believe that when the false Messiah is revealed at seal one, that he's imposter, that he's a counterfeit to Jesus, um, by seeing the comparison between the first seal description and Revelation 19:11 when Jesus returns. Um, I believe that this person, whoever the Jewish people accept and receive as their long-awaited Messiah, won't have any influence or any power on the global stage, except unless they're a leader of a country or something like that. But he's not going to be given any more power. He's just going to have the title of the Jewish Messiah. Then I believe that he will disappear. And again, maybe that's when he's tempted by with the kingdoms of the world, and he makes this agreement with Satan that he worships Satan. Like I don't know. That's just speculation. But I believe that when he reemerges and confirms the covenant with many for 1 week with Israel and the nations of the world, that's when he will take his place as the leader of Israel and even maybe even leader of the world by bringing peace to it. And I believe that event, that the confirmation of this covenant will come after the biblical war called the Gog-Magog War of Ezekiel 38. So in Ezekiel 38, there is a future war where specific nations that are mentioned in the passage attack Israel for spoils, for the resources of the land. And there's no one to defend Israel. America is not there to defend it, or there's no other allies. And some of the nations protest this attack, but don't get involved and don't deter it in any way. And so God steps in and decimates these nations and protects Israel and gives Israel the victory over these nations. And basically at that point, because of how miraculous it is, the whole world comes to know that the God of Israel exists, that God of Israel is protecting Israel and the Jewish people, and that's how the covenant comes to be with many nations. Is that after all that after this, nations are decimated, and then there's a time of peace. And so it says here in Ezekiel 38:18 and 19, and verse 23, it says, "And it will come to pass at the same time when God comes against the land of Israel, says the Lord God, that my fury will show in my face, for in my jealousy and in my fire of my wrath I have spoken. Surely in that day there will be a great earthquake in the land of Israel." And then later on it says, "Thus I will magnify myself and sanctify myself, and I will be known in the eyes of many nations. They shall know that I am the Lord." And so I think that when this battle takes place, when this war takes place, and God gives Israel the victory, that God's existence enters the human consciousness. At the moment, atheism, agnosticism, Buddhism, Hinduism, many other false beliefs will die quick death. And I believe that at the end of this war will be the time of Messiah. And we see this, in Judaism 101, this webpage here talking about what are the Jewish beliefs. So just so you know that the word Mashiach is Hebrew for the English word Messiah. So before the time of Mashiach or Messiah, there'll be war and suffering, and it references Ezekiel 38, this Gog-Magog war. The Mashiach will bring about the political and spiritual redemption of the Jewish people by bringing us back to Israel and restoring Jerusalem. He will establish a government in Israel that will be the center of all world government, both for Jews and Gentiles. He will rebuild the temple, reestablish its worship. He will restore the religious court system of Israel and establish Jewish law and the law of the land. So we can see that there are things that this Messiah, this false Messiah, has to do, and that he's going to be a mimic. So all these things are what Jesus will do when he returns and sets up his kingdom, and it'll be a permanent kingdom, one that will never be destroyed. But this false Messiah is going to mimic and accomplish these things in a much less way, but will be interpreted as being what the Messiah will do, and that's how a belief in that this person is the long-awaited Messiah will grow, is because he'll do these certain things. Then it talks about this word called Olam Haba, and basically it means the messianic age, or the messianic time of the Messiah. So it says, in the Olam Haba, the whole world will recognize the Jewish God as the only true God, and the Jewish religion as the only true religion. There will be no murder, robbery, competition, or jealousy. There will be no sin. Sacrifices will continue to be brought in the temple, but these will be limited to thanksgiving offerings, because there will be no further need for expiatory offerings. And so again, when you hear, this is what's different from many Bible prophecy teachers when they talk about a one world government, or they talk about a one world religion. I believe that this is where this false Messiah will set up from Israel a one world government, and the one world religion will be the Jewish Judaism, and because it's about salvation through the law, salvation through following the Mosaic law, and not salvation through Christ. And so again, is this 7 years of tribulation? And again, I don't believe it is. There's 7 years and there's a great tribulation, but I believe the way that it plays out is that the time of war, Ezekiel 38, Gog-Magog war, comes before the 7 years. Then at the end of that, when God gives Israel the victory, and everybody in the world sees that the God of Israel exists and he's protecting Israel, then this quote-unquote ambassador of God, this false Messiah, the Antichrist, will come to the forefront of the world stage. He will confirm a covenant with many nations, between Israel and the nations, for 1 week, for 7 years, and that's when the 7 years will begin. That he brings a false peace. There's no war there, and maybe even crime is down, because but people are ruled by the Mosaic law. It's religious authoritarianism and tyranny. Because imagine you have one person who is deemed to be the religious leader of the world, that he knows. So God has given Israel the victory. Everybody knows that the God of the Jews, the God of Israel, exists. He's protecting Israel. And then you have the Jewish people who are saying, this is our Messiah, this is our ambassador, this is our anointed one of God, who's going to show us how to live in this messianic age. And so then he sets up the Mosaic law, the religious system, the religious courts. And so imagine living in a system where you break a law and there's severe punishment, right? How many times in the Bible did the law say in the Old Testament that if you do this, you'll be put to death, right? So I just think that what's going to end up happening here is that, yes, there won't be any war amongst the nations. The world will be at peace, but that it's this religious authoritarianism that the people are under. And he brings a false messianic kingdom. And then at the halfway point, he suffers a head wound and survives. He's embodied or empowered by Satan. He kills the 2 witnesses, and he commits the abomination of the temple. And then Satan gives him the authority over the nations of the earth for 42 months, or the final 3.5 years before Jesus returns. And so one of the things is a lot of Christians talk about the Gog-Magog war, who's going to be involved, all that kind of stuff. But I want to talk about, where does this event happen? Where do I think this event takes place? And so you can read here Ezekiel 38, and it talks about the Gog, and Magog, and that they're the prince of Rosh and Meshach and Tubal, and prophesy, and so God says that he's going to bring these nations. He's going to put a hook in their jaw, a reason for them to come against Israel, and then and I believe that it's already there, like the desire to attack Israel. And I think that God just provides the, how sometimes, like, we're just looking for an opportunity to do something, like just give me some sort of sign, some direction. It's something that we really want. And I think that the desire here for Israel's resources and to take over the land, I think, is there. It's not something that God just manipulates these this leader or these nations to do. I think it's already there, but I think there's an opportunity that presents itself, and they take advantage of it. And so, so they come against Israel, and then God intervenes and saves Israel. And I know that there's some confusion as to whether this Gog-Magog war that happens in Ezekiel 38 is the same one that happens in Revelation 20, where it talks about that there's another Gog-Magog war. And I think that if we look at the context, it's the Revelation 20 is simply to draw our minds back to this war in Ezekiel 38. It's an attack against Israel. It's an attack to destroy God's land and drive God out of the land. In Ezekiel 38, it's about the Jewish people, driving the Jewish people out and taking over the land, taking over the resources. In Revelation, because Jesus is already reigning, because it says that Jesus reigns in Jerusalem for 1,000 years, and then when the 1,000 years is up, Satan is released, and then he will gather the nations to go against Israel with Jesus in Jerusalem. And so here we have that similarity. But in Ezekiel 38, it says in verse 23 that the Lord will make himself known to all the nations. Well, Jesus has been reigning on earth in Jerusalem for 1,000 years by Revelation 20. So the context doesn't make sense. If the Ezekiel 38 is the same war as Revelation 20, why is it saying that the Lord will make himself known to many nations if the Lord has already been ruling and reigning in Jerusalem for 1,000 years? Like, everybody knows who Jesus is. And so I believe that these two are not the same event. They're 1,007 years apart, because you got the 7 years before Jesus returns, and then you've got the 1,000 years reign of Christ. But the second one, I think, is meant to draw our attention to the similarities of the first. Where I do believe that the event is connected to is seal 6 in Revelation 6, verses 12 to 17. And so when we compare the passages of Ezekiel 38, verses 18 to 23, to Revelation 6, verses 12 to 17, you can see here in the multicolored aspects how each line is connected. There are different connections, about half a dozen similarities between these two passages that I've highlighted, so that you can see. So in Ezekiel 38, it says that the Lord God says he will show his fury, that his fury will show in his face for his jealousy and the fire of his wrath. He says, I have spoken. Well, here in Revelation 6, it talks about that people are crying out, fall on us and hide from us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand. So in both passages, it talks about the Lord's wrath. Then if you see here in blue, it talks about, in Ezekiel 38, great earthquake in the land of Israel. On Revelation 6, it talks about a great earthquake, and the fig tree drops its late figs. Well, we know the fig tree is Israel, the Jewish people in Israel. And so you can see here that mountains are thrown down, things are rained down from heaven, and both of those are also mentioned in both passages. And so that's why I've kind of highlighted and underlined, so you can see the different similarities between the two passages. So I believe that Revelation in chapter 6, the sixth seal, is the Gog-Magog war, where the world sees the wrath of God. And I believe that it might even be possible, when you understand the landmass that these nations, when you look at the landmass of the nations that come against Israel, that it's a huge landmass. It's a huge part of the world. And so when it talks about in the trumpets that a third of the waters are poisoned, that a third of the trees are burnt up, that I wonder if that some of the trumpets that are blown, if not all of the trumpets, 1 to 6, have to do with God's response to this invasion. But again, that's just speculation. But it's something that I've thought about. And so after the Gog-Magog war, which I believe is seal 6, The world comes to knowledge of God of Israel, that he has revealed himself and showed that Israel is protected, and that the false Messiah being, they believe, has been sent by God, leads them to build a world of peace, quote unquote. The world is war-torn and ravaged, crying out for a savior. And then when God saves Israel, then and people know that now God exists, that many false beliefs die a quick death. This false ambassador, this false Messiah, brings a covenant with many for 7 years, rebuilds the temple, institutes the law, and peace in exchange for freedom for 3.5 years. And how I think that the Antichrist becomes the beast is I think that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I think that being that quote-unquote savior of the world when you're not, having the ability as a human to command that much authority and power over people will corrupt you. I think that the devil will use this person, either embody them when they suffer a fatal head wound, to where he's the ghost in the machine, quote unquote. So the Antichrist, I think, may actually die, but then Satan embodies the body of the man of the Antichrist, becomes the beast and the willing servant of Satan. I think, and then he rises, and for the final 42 months, final 3.5 years, he pours out his wrath on the world. And I think then what happens is that once the beast rises, he sets up his kingdom with the 10 kings all over the earth and begins to put his plan into action. How to build an army of loyal subjects to blow Jesus out of the sky at Armageddon when he returns, and defeat Israel and wipe Israel off the map. And so one of the things that the Bible talks about is that people worship this beast. Well, why would they worship him? Well, he suffers a head wound and lives. He kills the 2 invincible witnesses that nobody's been able to kill for 3.5 years. He stands in the temple of God, blasphemes God, and isn't vaporized. And so I think the world will marvel at him as he does these things, and that's when they say, who is like the beast? Who can make war with him? Who can kill him? Who can defeat him? Can even God defeat him? And they question that. So they've seen God's power by the victory that he's given Israel. He's seen the power of these 2 witnesses, but then all of a sudden God allows them to be killed by this beast. And so then, okay, well, if God can't even stop, or can't even vaporize, this beast when he enters the temple of God and mocks him, maybe this beast, maybe the dragon, Satan, can defeat God. And so when we read in 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 9, the coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders, and with all unrighteousness, deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this reason God will send them strong delusion, that they will believe a lie, that they may be condemned, who do not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. I've heard many people apply this verse, about the strong delusion to today. But the context is that when the lawless one, doing the working of Satan, the power, the signs, the lying wonders, which these events that he does, and they believe that he is greater than God, then that is the strong delusion. So we just got to be careful we don't take things out of context. And so when he does these quote-unquote miracles, then you've got the second beast, the false prophet, that basically, lifts up the beast and gets the world to worship the first beast and introduces the mark of the beast for loyalty, And in Revelation 13:16-17 says, he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their forehead, right hand, or on their forehead. Some people, like, it might say in their right hand or in their forehead instead of on, but either way, it's a mark in or on their right hand and in or on their foreheads, that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Again, how many times have we heard that something is the mark of the beast? I've heard this for as long as I've been studying Bible prophecy, that there's so many things that are the mark of the beast. Oh, this is the mark of the beast. And no, the mark of the beast is issued at the 3.5 year mark of the 7 years after the Antichrist suffers the head wound and does these quote unquote miracles, stands in the temple, commits the abomination, defeats, kills the two witnesses, invincible witnesses, and then the false prophet issues the mark of worship of the first beast. And so again, just need to, because so many times videos come out and they'll say, oh, this is the mark of the beast, or oh, this is the beast system, or oh, whatever. And we got to take the Bible as it talks, as it tells us what's going to happen. And so again, looking at the timeline, I believe that seal 6, so we're in 2023, at some point seals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6 will be broken. It's a time of war. We've got the Ezekiel 38, Gog Magog war, I believe is seal 6. Then when God gives Israel the victory and the world sees that the God of Israel is alive and well, then this false Antichrist, this false Messiah, or this Antichrist, the false Messiah, this false ambassador of God, comes to the forefront, confirms the covenant between Israel and many nations for 1 week. He brings a false peace, religious authoritarianism, a false messianic kingdom, and then two witnesses, invincible witnesses, will preach for 1260 days. Then at the middle point, this Antichrist will suffer a death wound. He will be embodied and killed, embodied and empowered by Satan. He will kill the two invincible witnesses and many other saints, many of the Christians and stuff, and people. It's not just the two witnesses, but and he'll commit the abomination of the temple, never being vaporized, never seeing, like God allows him to do that, allows the deception to come, and the beast then reigns for 42 months or 3.5 years until Jesus returns. And so hopefully this is how you understand the story as well so far. Antichrist will be known as known when the Jewish people declare a man is their long-awaited Messiah. He may appear 2 times, first to be declared, seal 1, then fade in the background and reemerge to do miracles and signs and wonders to deceive. And that the God, maybe even claim that God has given Israel the victory, that he had something to do with it. At the Gog Magog war, I think he'll take advantage of the victory. Either way, whether he's attributed to bringing the God, into the picture, like, if the Jewish people say to him, "Oh, pray for us. You pray that God will spare us and he'll intervene," and then the Antichrist will pray, and God, even though God was going to give Israel the victory all along, it says that in his word, that they may look at him and be like, "Oh, it's because of something the Antichrist did," But either way, he'll take advantage of the victory that God gives Israel. And I believe that the victory in Gog Magog war happens in seal 6 and possibly connects to the trumpets as God's response to the invasion of Israel. To become the leader of Israel, facilitating a peace covenant for 1 week, because Israel is protected by God, he essentially becomes the leader of the world. He will rebuild the temple, institute the Mosaic law, bringing religious tyranny under the guise of peace. The world will be unified after such devastating war and will be prosperous. I believe that at that point, they'll have a leader. They'll see that the world can be at peace, and I think that he will bring unity to the world for a point in time. I think for the first 3.5 years of the 7 years, there's going to be the 144,000 Jewish people who are sealed to evangelize, and the 2 invincible witnesses will preach for 1260 days and then are killed by the beast. Satan and his angels are cast down to earth in Revelation 12 at the 3.5 year mark of the 7 years. The Antichrist, the little horn, suffers a fatal head wound and survives, and is given authority to reign for 42 months or 3.5 years. He's embodied by Satan as the beast, which I think like I said, I think in the wilderness or that time of disappearance, the Antichrist man made a deal with early on. He now unleashes hell on earth. He stands in the temple, commits the abomination, declares himself God, and the Lord doesn't vaporize it, causing many to worship him, saying, "Who can be like the beast? Who can make war with him? Can even God defeat this beast?" And the mark of the beast is issued at that point, and then he reigns. He has authority for 3.5 years until Jesus comes. So that's the end of part 6. I hope that makes sense. I hope I've been able to give you some perspective on the Antichrist, the man, the false Messiah, then how it changes to the beast in Revelation 13. And also that the 7 years, I don't believe that it's 7 years of tribulation, which would include the seals and the trumpets and the bowls, but that it begins in Revelation 11. The first 3.5 years, I believe, are religious authoritarianism, just not with the judgments that we see in Scripture. And then at the final 3.5 years, that's when the bowl judgments come in. But we'll cover that in another video. But hopefully that there's a little bit more clarification that there is a 7-year period. I just don't believe it's all tribulation. I believe that there's a great tribulation in the final 3.5 years before Jesus returns. And so hopefully this all makes sense. I know that was a long video and covered a lot of information. Hopefully as we go along, maybe whatever questions that you have, and definitely put them in the comment section, and I'll try and answer them in future videos or respond to them. But hopefully that with the timelines and everything, that it makes things a little bit more clear. And I hope that you find that this is biblically sound as well. And so until next time, if the Lord tarries, then I pray that he blesses you and keeps you until he returns. And I'll see you in the next video. All right, take care. Keep sharing the love of Jesus. Keep praying for the lost. Keep trusting the Lord's plan, no matter what comes, even if we don't understand it. All right, and take care. Bye for now.